On the morning of July 3, 1866, the future of Central Europe was hidden in rain, smoke, and broken lines of march. Near the fortress town of Königgrätz, in what is now the Czech Republic, Austrian soldiers waited behind the Bistritz River. Across the fields and villages, Prussian columns moved toward them from different directions. Some units were early, some were late, some commanders could not yet see the full battlefield. But by the end of the day, one thing would be clear: the old German order had been broken. Königgrätz, also known as Sadowa, was not the largest battle in European history. It was not the final battle of German unification, but it was the battle that made a Prussian-led Germany possible. Before it, the German lands were still organized around a long rivalry between Austria and Prussia. After it, Austria was pushed out of German politics, the old German Confederation was dissolved, and the road opened toward the North German Confederation and, 5 years later, the German Empire. The battlefield grew out of a political question that had been unresolved for generations: who would lead the German-speaking states? Austria had prestige, imperial history, and a multinational empire. Prussia had a disciplined army, a growing industrial base, and a state increasingly organized around war planning. Otto von Bismarck, Prussia's minister-president, did not invent the rivalry, but he understood how to turn it into a sequence of limited wars with political results. 1864, Prussia and Austria had fought Denmark together over Schleswig and Holstein. That victory did not settle the German question. It gave Bismarck a new lever. Disputes over the duchies became a way to isolate Austria, frame Prussia as the more decisive German power, and prepare for a war that many European observers thought would be dangerous and uncertain. Bismarck wanted a conflict short enough to avoid foreign intervention and decisive enough to force a new German arrangement. The Prussian army that entered the campaign was shaped by Helmuth von Moltke, chief of the Prussian General Staff. Moltke did not imagine war as a single parade ground plan. He built systems for mobilization, rail movement, staff work, and independent action under a shared objective. Prussia used railways to move armies quickly and telegraphs to coordinate at distances that earlier commanders would have found terrifying. The goal was not just to fight bravely. It was to arrive at the decisive place, with several armies moving as parts of one machine. The Austrian army had strengths of its own. It was large, experienced, and proud. Its soldiers had fought in difficult campaigns, and its empire could draw on many peoples. But in 1866, Austrian command was under severe strain. Field Marshal Ludwig von Benedek was respected, but he had not wanted command in the northern theater. Austria's army faced problems of coordination, doctrine, and equipment. Its Lawrence rifle could be accurate, but Prussia's Drace needle gun allowed faster breech-loading fire from a prone or covered position. Technology alone did not decide the battle, but it changed the rhythm of combat. When the armies met in Bohemia, Prussia advanced in separate formations. The First Army, the Army of the Elbe, and the Second Army under Crown Prince Frederick William. The danger of this plan was obvious. If the Austrians struck one Prussian army before the others arrived, Prussia could suffer a major defeat. The opportunity was just as clear. If the separate armies converged on the battlefield at the right time, Austria could be pressed from more than one direction and overwhelmed. Benedek placed much of his army near Königgrätz, with defensive positions around villages, woods, and ridges. Early on July 3rd, the Prussian First Army attacked toward the Bistritz. Fighting spread through villages such as Sadowa and into the Sweepwold, a wooded area that became a brutal killing ground. Units lost formation. Officers struggled to keep control. Men fired through trees and smoke at enemies they could barely see. The battle was not a clean chessboard. It was mud, noise, confusion, and decisions made with incomplete information. At first, the Austrians were not simply collapsing. Their artillery was strong and their soldiers fought hard. Austrian guns punished Prussian movement across open ground. Counterattacks created moments of crisis. In the Sweepwold, the Prussians paid heavily for ground that was tactically dangerous. If the battle had remained a frontal fight between exhausted armies, the result might have been much less decisive. But Moltke's plan depended on the arrival of the Second Army on the Austrian flank. That arrival took time. Couriers and staff officers carried fragments of information. Commanders listened for cannon fire and read the landscape for signs of the larger battle. For hours, the question was whether the Crown Prince's army would arrive soon enough to matter. When the Second Army began to appear on the Austrian right, the balance changed. The Austrians were no longer facing pressure from one direction. Their line was threatened by convergence. The Prussian needle gun mattered most in those close and chaotic moments. Soldiers could load while lying down, fire more rapidly, and maintain pressure in ways that Austrian formations found difficult to answer. But the weapon worked inside a larger system. Railways brought the armies, staff planning aimed them, commanders moved them. Artillery and infantry held ground until the decisive flank pressure arrived. Königgrätz was a battle of technology, but also of institutions. For Benedek, the field became a problem with no good solution. Hold too long and the army risked encirclement or destruction. Withdraw too soon and the campaign might be lost. As Prussian pressure grew, Austrian command and communications struggled. The retreat became increasingly necessary. By evening, Austria had suffered a catastrophic defeat. Casualty numbers vary by source and category, but Austrian losses were far heavier than Prussian losses, and the strategic result was unmistakable. The road to Vienna seemed open, yet Bismarck did not want to destroy Austria completely. This is one of the most important parts of the story. Some Prussians wanted harsher terms. Bismarck wanted a peace that removed Austria from German affairs without making Austria a permanent enemy or inviting other powers into the crisis. The battle gave him leverage. Restraint turned that leverage into a political settlement. The Treaty of Prague ended the Austro-Prussian War. The German Confederation, created after Napoleon's defeat, was dissolved. Austria was excluded from the new organization of northern German states. Prussia annexed several territories and led the North German Confederation. The southern German states remained formally outside, but the direction of travel was clear. The German question would no longer be solved through Austrian leadership. It would be solved through Prussian power. This is why Königgrätz matters beyond the battlefield. It shifted the center of gravity in Europe. A Prussian-led Germany would soon become one of the continent's strongest industrial and military states. In 1870, a new war with France would complete unification under the Prussian king, proclaimed German emperor in 1871. Königgrätz did not create the empire by itself, but it removed the largest internal obstacle to that empire. The battle also changed how Europeans thought about modern war. Observers studied the needle gun, rail mobilization, general staff planning, and operational convergence. Some learned the lessons carefully, others simplified them. It was tempting to say Prussia won because of a rifle. It was more accurate to see a state system. Education, conscription, railroads, staff work, armaments, doctrine, and political leadership pointed toward one campaign goal. Modern war was becoming a contest between whole state capacities, not just battlefield courage. There is a human cost behind that transformation. The language of unification and strategy can make the soldiers disappear. They should not. Austrian infantrymen held woods and ridges under punishing fire. Prussian soldiers advanced through mud and artillery bursts without knowing whether support would arrive. Wounded men lay in villages and fields that had become names on staff maps. A battle that later historians treat as a hinge of European statecraft was also a day of fear, blood, smoke, and exhaustion for the people inside it. The political consequences were equally human. Austria turned its attention inward and toward a new constitutional compromise with Hungary in 1867, creating Austria-Hungary. Smaller German states had to adjust to Prussian dominance. Liberals who wanted national unity had to decide how much military monarchy they were willing to accept as the price of unification. Bismarck used victory to reshape politics at home, reconciling some critics to a state that had won the national cause by force. Königgrätz also helps explain a central paradox of the 19th century. National unification could look like liberation from fragmentation, but it could also come through war, hierarchy, and exclusion. The German nation-state that emerged after 1871 was not the democratic dream of every 1848 revolutionary. It was built through conservative statecraft, military success, and careful diplomacy. The battle near Königgrätz was one of the moments when that path became more likely than the alternatives. The aftermath did not make Europe stable forever. It rearranged the board. Austria and Prussia avoided a war of annihilation, but France now watched a stronger Prussia with alarm. Smaller states recalculated. Military planners across Europe studied speed, firepower, and mobilization. The victory that seemed limited in 1866 helped prepare the conditions for the next crisis. That is how some battles matter, not because they end history, but because they change what future leaders believe is possible. If we strip the story to one sentence, Königgrätz was the day Prussia proved it could defeat Austria and reorganize Germany around itself. But the clearer lesson is deeper. Political ambition needed military systems. Military systems needed railways, weapons, staffs, and disciplined soldiers. Battlefield victory needed diplomacy afterward. And national unity, celebrated by some as destiny, was built through choices that excluded other futures. On July 3, 1866, the smoke over Bohemia did not reveal the German Empire, the Franco-Prussian War, or the balance of power that would shape modern Europe, but it pointed toward them. A rainy battlefield near Königgrätz became a hinge between the old German Confederation and a new Prussian-led order. The past, made clear, is that modern Europe was not only written in treaties and parliaments. It was also made in fields where armies arrived on time, commanders hesitated, weapons changed the tempo, and politicians knew exactly what to do with victory.